Well, hello there, and welcome to another tank review. I'm Corny Swiss, and today I'll be looking at the SU-122-54, a Rank 5 8.0 battle rating Soviet tank destroyer. Now, as with all reviews, the various parts of this review are timestamped down below in the description, so feel free, if you don't want to hear the garage part, or you just want to hear the final opinion, or whatever your heart desire, feel free to go click those timestamps. They'll take you where you want to go. But if you want to hear the garage portion of this review, let's get started. So the SU-122-54 is kind of interesting because when I was doing my research to talk about this tank historically, I wasn't really able to find very much. Basically, the sum of what I was able to find is kind of what I already knew. I didn't know that this tank was produced between 1955 and 1957, and 77 vehicles were built. I didn't know that. But I did know that this is basically a T-54 without a turret, add a superstructure, and a 122mm gun. Hence the name designation, SU, which basically stands for tank destroyer, 122, which is caliber of the gun, and 54, which is the chassis it's based off of. And when you look at it, you really can see the similarities. The way the tracks are set up, the wheels are actually spaced slightly differently, according to my sources. But essentially, this is a T-54A, or the A variant of the T-54. It just has a superstructure, a big gun, and two heavy machine guns as its secondary armament. Now, I have a theory on why. It's something I've been thinking about. So, tank destroyers in World War II were designed to destroy tanks, right? Once the World War II ended, we see a shift towards main battle tanks. Tanks with large enough caliber guns that are fast, have some armor, or no armor at all, but are generally just all-purpose machines. We also see things like the M103, which has a tremendous gun that packs a tremendous punch, and tank destroyers seem to be phased out a lot. Like, a lot. You know, why would you need an unturreted tank destroyer when you can fit this gun on a heavy tank, like the T-10M, which we're getting soon in patch 1.51. So, I wouldn't be surprised if this is kind of the end of the tank destroyers as we know it, at least in rank 5. This will probably be the last tank destroyer we see. And it's all about, I think 90% of it is due to the fact that it's unturreted. You don't see, well, if you want to look at it purely empirically, how many 8.0 battle rating tanks are there in War Thunder that are unturreted? One, it's the SU-122-54. The other two that are honorable mentions are at 7.0 battle rating, both of them, Jagdtiger and the T-95. Right, so you see kind of a trend. And before we even start, I'm going to make a prediction that this tank will probably see a battle rating shift down to about 7.7 or so. Because I think the unturreted portion of this tank is going to be a problem for some people. But let's get into the statistics and things like that. Like I said previously, the SU-122-54 is a rank 5 8.0 battle rating tank destroyer. It weighs 36 tons, has an engine power of 520 horsepower at 2,000 RPM. It can manage a max speed of 46 kilometers an hour on a maximum inclination of 35 degrees. So, I guess let's kind of talk about maneuverability. This is basically a T-54, so I have to learn to speak English again. So you can expect similar mobility, and this tank does perform very similarly to the T-54 in terms of acceleration, general mobility. Because you think about it, it's the same chassis. It's basically the same engine, you know, same horsepower, slightly slower RPM, 50 RPM less. So maybe the pickup will be slower, but in general, this tank is going to be just as fast as the T-54. Right? It actually weighs a half ton more and has a 1 kilometer an hour higher top speed, you know. But for all intents and purposes, the maneuverability is the exact same. Maximum inclination, 1 degree less than the T-54. Well, whatever. Has same gun depression though, that's cool. And said gun depression is 4 degrees with 16 degrees of elevation. So not a lot of elevation, and On maps like, I can't say the name, Herdentingen Forest, you know what I'm talking about, the map that looks like Eastern Europe but is called the Forest or whatever it is. I can't say the name, and it's going to be difficult for me to try. 4 degrees of gun depression, it's fine, 4 degrees. I mean, it's one more than the heavy tanks get. And it's perfectly adequate for what kind of this tank wants to do. It's a low profile tank already. So generally, there's a lot of like little low spots in the ground that you can hide in. And in one of the replays, you're going to see me use that to escape a sticky situation. But in terms of gun handling, it's fine. You know, it's 4 degrees of gun depression. It's fine. It's whatever. 16 degrees of elevation. I actually have run into problems because, like I said on that forest map, I have shot at targets in excess of the elevation of this gun. Well, I've tried to. There was an M103. I think you're going to see the shot in the replay. Spoiler, I don't hit it. I get really close though. And the thing I noted was that if that guy was any farther away, which is entirely conceivable, I wouldn't have been able to land the shot on him just because I don't have the elevation. And it's actually the first time I've run into that problem. So 16 degrees might be light in the rare circumstance that you have to shoot at a target that's 3 kilometers away. But the nice thing about this tank is the gun. And we'll talk about the gun after we talk about the armor, because the armor is worth mentioning. Let's pull up the armor spread. So the hull armor, 100 millimeters in the front, 100 millimeters on the lower plate, 100 millimeters on this bit, 80 millimeters on the side. You know, the hull is 80, the back 45, 30. So it's kind of what you expect. You know, 80 millimeters of side armor isn't good. And it's not like you can really angle this thing because this plate here is basically anti-angling, right? Because as I move right now, okay, if we point this thing straight on like that, this plate is basically an auto bounce zone, right? It's effectively 320 something millimeters, and it's angled at 41 degrees back, right? So this is going to bounce all day long. This will not. 152 millimeters, 147. This is no problem. Now the gun thing here, this weird ball shape, I guess it's the same mantlet that all the SU variants have, can be a little tricky, but I have been penetrated clean through it, and 200 millimeters at the base of the gun, it's not generally where you're going to get penetrated anyway. So the front of this tank's armor isn't that good. You can get bounces off it, but I'm pretty sure the reason you get bounces is that they hit these bits. You know, for whatever reason. Maybe you turned or something and they're going to hit this and then that'll bounce. But if they shoot you square in the face, the 50 degrees backsloped armor generally doesn't save you. But it has. So it's one of those troll things about this tank. I have bounced, and I'm not proud of it, Jagdtigers frontally. Just facing them square on. But I think that's variance. I don't know. They must have caught my armor bad. Because on paper and in general practice, the armor will not save you. There's very rare occurrences where it does, and I don't know why. But like I said, as you angle the front of the tank, this armor now becomes 150 something millimeters, which is very penetratable. So that's an issue. You don't really want to angle this tank. And really, you don't even want to be out in the open in this tank. You want to be hiding. You want to be in bushes. You want to be kind of on the flank. You want to use the stealthiness of this tank, because it is pretty stealthy. It's a very low profile machine. And it has T-54 mobility, so it can get to places in a reasonable amount of time. So you really want to use that stealth and that mobility to try and get around the battlefield and come at people unexpectedly, and use the gun, which now we'll talk about, to your advantage. Now the interesting thing about this gun, it's 122 millimeter, and with a pretty good crew, I have my reload down to 14.4 seconds. That's significant because that's actually faster than my T-54 1951, which is one of my, which is a medium tank with a 100mm gun, and its reload is 15 seconds. So my SU-122-54 has a faster rate of fire with 22 more millimeters caliber. It's pretty significant. It can keep up with a lot of tanks in the game. M103s, you will beat their reload usually. The The only tank you really have to fear in terms of just if you take their first shot and you're able to return fire is M47s. M47s have about a 11 second reload, so they can beat your reload, and they have a very dangerous heat shell. But they have 0 armor, so usually if you hit them, they will die or take a lot of damage, in which case you can get the next shot off. So let's look at the ammunition types, because there's a few, right? So you start off with this base armor-piercing shell. And as armor-piercing shells go, it's alright. It's the base 122mm AP shell. 25 kilogram shell, so it weighs a lot. 795 meters per second muzzle velocity. It's not very good. At a 0 angle of attack, at 10 meters you have 200 millimeters penetration. At 500 meters you have 179 millimeters penetration. At 1500 meters you have 141. And at 2000 meters you have 125 millimeters penetration. It means that generally this shell gets the job done frontally against tanks at really close ranges, but not really far ranges. If you're using this shell, you need to be flanking, and you need to be doing weird things, really, because you need to get flanks to really be effective. And the muzzle velocity, I mean, 795, it's kind of whatever. The next shell you get is this next armor-piercing shell, which is the BR-471B. Now notice it's 800 meters per second muzzle velocity, which, I mean, isn't good, but it's kind of what you get out of the 122mm guns. I wish it was higher, but then again, if it was higher, this gun would be way too accurate. 25 kilogram shell. At 10 meters, you have 207 millimeters penetration. At 500, you have 183. At 1500, you have 144, and at 2000, you have 129. So basically, it's an upgrade of penetration across the entire spectrum, and it is the better shell. So as soon as you unlock the BR-471B, you're going to immediately start using it. You know, it's empirically better than the BR-471 in my opinion. It's just way more useful. You hit a couple breakpoints, like for example, you can penetrate the front of some tanks, like King Tiger 105s, out to 500 meters now. With this shell, you need it to be within 500 meters. So it's a minor upgrade, but it is an upgrade. Next shell you'll unlock, the BR-471D. This is the shell that is very potent on other 122mm gun-armed tanks, things, whatever. You know what I mean. I can't speak. And it's a 25 kilogram shell, 800 meters per second muzzle velocity. At 10 meters, you have 230 millimeters penetration. At 500, you have 203. 1500, you have 168. And at 2000, you have 159. So the penetration gets better. And now you can penetrate the front of King Tiger 105s out to 1000 meters. You see the trend here. This shell is empirically better than the previous shell, which was empirically better than the shell before that. So the BR-471D is a good shell. And against most targets, let's say M47s, what else, Panther, any of the Panthers, but I guess you won't really see Panthers. I have seen Panthers, but this thing basically melts less than superbly armored tanks. The real moneymakers on this tank, and actually the real problem children, are the next two shells. Here is an armor-piercing discarding Sabo shell. This is a 7.4 kilogram shell at 1400 meters per second muzzle velocity. So this thing is a rocket. You know, it is very high muzzle velocity, and this is a very good tool for engaging targets at really long range. But it has an interesting, I don't know, drawback. I mean, it's basically an APCR shell. And we know about APCR shells that they do generally less damage than AP shells of the same caliber. So, something to keep in mind. It's also really expensive, 1500 lines per shot. It can be difficult to make money in this tank, especially if you don't get a lot of kills. But penetration, at 10 meters you have 313 millimeters penetration. At 500 you have 305. At 1500 you have 265. And at 2000 you have 260. So you can basically penetrate whatever you're shooting at whatever range it is. If it's normal combat range, you will penetrate. Except the face of a T-95. You won't penetrate that. But you'll get close. So this is basically it's a good addition to your arsenal when you do unlock it. I recommend carrying more of the BR-471D shell than this shell because the AP shell generally has more all-round utility than this Sabo shell, but this is worth having around. And my loadout actually right now is 25 of the heat shell, which is we'll talk about next, 5 Sabo, 5 AP. And mainly because I find myself firing this shell a lot. You can see I have it selected as my default. This is the heat shell. This is the shell that kind of gets people up in arms. And I can kind of understand why. It has the highest penetration of shells in the game. It's an 18 kilogram shell, so it's a heavy one. 820 meters per second muzzle velocity. So 20 meters per second faster than the AP shells, and that is kind of significant because that makes it easier to get on target. It's actually a relatively high velocity heat shell. It's not like the Patton 2s where it has or the M47 where its heat shell is like 1300 meters per second, which is ridiculous. It's basically a laser pointer. But this shell has 400 millimeters of penetration at all ranges. Now, the reason I carry a lot of this, there have been situations where the AP shell might have been able to penetrate but didn't, and if I'd been firing this heat shell, I would have absolutely penetrated. And you can get away with a lot more shenanigans with this heat shell just because of how high the raw penetration value is. Right? It can struggle against heavily angled surfaces, but against like a mouse, this is the go-to. Or the Sabo, but I generally use this just against everything. Because the nice thing about heat, in my opinion, is I think the cone of the shell penetrating than the cone that results is much better. It also has this effect that a heat shell is basically a chemical reaction. It's basically just a hot lance of metal going through, or molten metal going through the tank. That tends to set things on fire. That tends to destroy things. Now, it doesn't have the same damaging ability as a penetrated AP shell, but I think it's better than the Sabo round in terms of raw damage output. So this is what I carry a lot of. This is what I generally use, because it can give you that one-hit punch. Not always, but it gives you, most of the time, can give you a one-hit punch that the AP shell packs. But it brings better penetration than the Sabo shell, and definitely better penetration than the AP shell. So this is generally the shell you want to get and you want to use. You basically want to make a beeline for this guy right here, and then use it all day long. The issue you're going to run into is it's 1400 lines, which is very expensive for a shell. And yeah, it's unfortunate. Like, I'm regretting the day I have to replenish my stock. That's going to be bad. Oh god, I mean, 18, the reason it wasn't is because I actually dropped to like 20,000 credits, and I think it was well below that, and I couldn't afford to buy more shells. So, you cannot purchase more. Oh well, I guess I can't have any more. Then we come to the HE shell. I've said it before, if it's not 152 millimeters outside of rank battle rating 4.0, basically, if the SU-122 gets away with having 122mm HE shell, anything above that does not. The KV-2 has 152. That's why it survives. The SU-152 has 152. The ISU-152 has 152. Basically, if you have less than 152mm of caliber, I don't recommend firing HE shells. I don't think they're very effective, and it just doesn't. It doesn't do anything that like the heat shell won't, you know. It's just, I don't think the HE shell is very good, so I don't recommend using it. I encourage you to experiment with it if you want, but if you're looking for just empirical, what's the best shell on this tank? I think it's the heat shell. So, there you go. I can honestly say I think I fired the HE shell maybe 4 times, less than 5, and I was not impressed. So, yeah. That's the gun. The gun is fantastic. It's, I think, I hesitate to say this, but at the same time I'm pretty sure this is the best tank destroyer gun. This is the best raw tank killing gun in the game, other than I think the M103's gun. I like the M103's gun a lot. In terms, and I'm talking about in terms of I shoot you once and you blow up and die. The M103 and this tank are equal footing, and I would, in a straight up shell on shell fight where both these tanks fire, it's debatable who survives. You know, I've destroyed plenty of M103s, and M103s have destroyed me a lot. But the reason I pick this tank is the rate of fire. It can just keep the shells going. The Jagdtiger, which I guess is now at 7.0, so it's not really a fair comparison, but the Jagdtiger's gun, its reload is too long. It's 21 seconds, if I'm not mistaken, so it's almost 7 seconds slower, right? And a lot of times, if you get 2 shells off with this tank, you win the engagement. Because the enemy will only likely get 1. So, I think this is one of the finest guns in the game currently. Now, when we see some new tanks entering the field, I'm going to have to reevaluate. I really like the look of some of the guns we have coming in 1.51. But let's look at the X-Ray, because this is a drawback of this tank. It carries 35 rounds of ammunition. It's a low-profile machine, so as you'd expect, it is made of ammo racks. And I don't feel good about taking shells out of this tank, because I only have 35. And there was a game where I got down to single-digit shells. It was a long game on Kursk, and I missed a lot, basically. But the point is that, and now it was more my bad play rather than the tank's gun. The gun is actually fairly accurate, but it was I wasn't playing well, so I didn't hit many things. But it's basically made of ammo racks. If this thing gets hit in the side or even hit in the front, it's likely to damage some ammo rack. And especially if they're firing heat shells, these ammo racks are going to get cooked. And I mean, the engine back here, it's basically, no matter where you get hit, an ammo rack is likely to be damaged or destroyed. Especially from the side. The inside is made of ammo racks. You know, at least the engine's back here. But, I mean, at the same time, if you get penetrated frontally, it's likely to get back here. So, especially with a heat shell, especially with an APCR shell, which is generally what you get hit with. So, in terms of layout, it's pretty standard. You have the driver over here. Well, I guess that's not quite standard. Usually the driver's like right down here in between fuel tanks. But driver, gunner, loader, commander, another loader. Which is probably why this tank has better rate of fires. It has 2 loaders, which is nice. It makes things better. So that's the layout. It's pretty standard, pretty typical. Not much you can do to avoid the ammo rack problem. I don't think it's worth taking shells out of this tank because there's not many already, you know. So I wouldn't take... I guess the question is, which tank take shells out of the T-54? You know, it has 1 less shell. I would never take shells out of my T-54. So I'm definitely not taking shells out of my SU-122-54. So, a recap of this machine. It's a very powerful, sneaky tank destroyer, but doesn't have much in the way of survivability. And now people will tell you stories of this armor trolling them, and I've been on the receiving end, I've also been on the delivering end. It happens, but it's not as often as you think. Matter of fact, it happens very rarely. But I think it's when something happens that shouldn't, people get very... well, not even that it shouldn't. It might have been a situation where it was just a rough, thing. Like maybe they were up angled slightly and the shell, just couldn't deal with 50 degrees of armor. I mean, it's a % chance. It's kind of RNG. But the point of the matter is, armor is not something you can rely on. The gun is something you can rely on. The gun will get the job done. You need to put it in a position to allow it to do its job. So that means flanking, that means being sneaky, that honestly means kind of staying with your team too, giving them something else to shoot at. An SU-122-54 all by itself is extremely vulnerable. And when I am all by myself, I find myself in a lot of trouble. So, without further ado, let's get into the replay, shall we? So here we are in a realistic battle on the forest map. The one I can't pronounce but starts with an H. And this is the replay I referenced a couple times. Now, before we really get into the meat of the action, I want to say something that I've been, you know, if I'm ever in a game and someone, if you've seen the channel and you notice that I'm in a game and you're in the same game, feel free to say hello. It doesn't bother me at all. I enjoy talking with y'all, and because there have been people who have messaged me after games and said, oh, you know, I didn't want to bother you while you were playing in case you were recording or whatever, but, you know, hey, you know, it was cool playing with you, whatever they say, you know. It's all, people generally just always say really nice stuff, and I do not care at all if you say it in match. It doesn't bother me at all. So feel free to chime in, say hello. I'd be more than happy to have a discussion, because I don't know, I like talking to people. It's not bad. But the game, so if you see me stopping kind of randomly, it's because I'm just quickly typing a message, you know, because it's something I like to do. So anyway, let's talk about this map, because this map I've found to be a pretty solid one for this tank, and that's primarily because there's a central zone that everyone kind of goes to, which is this city. And there's a lot of outlying countryside and forests and bushes to hide in. And my plan on this occasion was to basically flank south. Most people don't spawn at the southern points because you are kind of isolated away from the objectives. So why spawn down there? It just takes too long to get there. Myself and a T-54 are actually flanking down this side, and we're then going to kind of do like a pincer movement and try and envelop this little town area and push on towards the cap, right? Because ultimately the cap is the goal, and then we got to defend. We got to set up a firing line and defend against the returning enemy, assuming that we're able to oust them from the town once they set up their little foothold. So something to always be aware of is that this tank is short, so you can actually hide in like ditches and ridges. I mean, this one would cover most tanks, so it's not a big deal, but something to always keep in mind is, okay, can I hide in this ditch? Is this ditch deep enough where I can drive along and not be spotted, but not so deep that I can't see what's going on over the top? Because you can kind of use the realistic camera angle to see over the top on things, which can be useful. Now, I've chosen this little foresty bit up here as kind of my first position, because I'm still kind of within the support of my team, but I'm also off to the side a little bit, and I do have some concealment, so it's entirely possible they may not notice me immediately. And that's the key. I want to fire the first shot. If I fire the first shot, they are not likely going to be able to return fire, because this tank basically always penetrates. And when it always penetrates and you aim well, a lot of times you can hit gunners and things like that. So now there is enemies in this town. Ooh, saw something. Now, something to keep in mind, it's a King Tiger. Something to keep in mind is that heat shells are high explosive. When they hit something, they detonate. And I'm actually confirming he's alive there, but I've cleared whatever it was, the tree that was in the way, and boom. Shell right through the front of the tank, detonates the, basically causes some serious problems, and he's knocked out. Because it's a 122mm heat shell. It's a large shell, you know. If you get hit, it's going to hurt. Now, but like I said, you need to be aware of the fact that, and I thought maybe that AI was alive, but he wasn't. Or I don't think he was. We are losing tanks, though, and my teammates are calling for cover, and I'm not in a great position at the moment to provide it. I can't see any enemy tanks, so I need to move forward. But quickly back to that point I made, try and clear the way with machine gun fire. If there's trees in the way, chop down the trees with your machine guns and then fire the shell, just to avoid that issue. And that was an unfortunate shot. He was reversing hard, and it basically skips off the front of his tank. And normally that would have hit. Now, he is in a decent little position there, so I basically have to aim for his turret. And I hit him, and oh, he's going to return fire. And it looks like it hit my gun, which is why I'm still alive. So I'm going to have to back up, get back down on the other side of this ridge and repair. The downside of heat ammo is that it penetrates in a straight line, right? So an AP shell right there, if it penetrated, would have likely destroyed his turret portion of his tank. So right there, it's entirely possible in this situation, because I know I'm on the flank, it's entirely correct to be shooting AP here, because when you fire the AP, I just had a complete lapse of thought. That was weird. Basically, AP from the side is basically always going to penetrate tanks, because no tank that, except the mouse, has the armor value to withstand the D AP shell, the BR-417D. So that's the best option in this situation. However, I am firing the heat shell because I am concerned about return fire, basically. I want to be sure that I penetrate, and things like angled surfaces, maybe they get a sneaky bounce, or maybe there's a lot of situations where I need my first shell to penetrate and do damage, and I'm confident enough in my ability to aim that I would rather fire the heat shell. But it's really personal preference. Right there, AP shell would have been perfectly fine. But I'm going to come around this little hedgerow, and we're going to kind of see the rate of fire in action. So come around here, and that's a Jagdpanther. Now my first shot, not sure what happened there. I think it must have hit something and detonated. He fires a shell, doesn't do any damage, which is nice. But my gun's already reloaded. I get the next shell, for sure. Bam. Right through the center of his crew compartment, sets him on fire. That basically assures me that he's not going to get another shot on me, because he has to put out the fire. And here's where these 14mm heavy machine guns come in handy, is I'm peppering this AAA to try and help out my guy, but I also need to kill this Jagdpanther. The second shot goes in, gets the rest of his crew, sets him on fire, all kinds of good stuff. Uses machine guns to kind of chew up the AAA. He gets knocked out. So, ouch. Yeah. That can be a problem. Being bombed is something that's never fun. But I had a backup. I actually had 2 backup vehicles, because I'd played this tank and gotten some trophies and gotten some backups. So I said, okay, well, I'll just spawn right back in. And now my thought process is, okay, I'm going to be way too far away to be kind of up in the action like I was. Basically, my job now is to provide long-range fire support. I mean, I have heat shells that can penetrate anything at any range, basically. So my job now is to try and land shots at long ranges and support my team as they push forward, because I'm not going to be able to get there in time to really influence the outcome. It would be the time it would take me to get there. The battle will probably be decided one way or the other. So I have a better chance of influencing the outcome by engaging at longer ranges and trying to knock tanks out that way. And there are targets. And we're going to spot one moving basically out of their spawn. You can see him there. I believe that's an M103. It's really far distance, so it's difficult to tell, but I'm pretty sure that's an M103 based on what looks to be the turret. And now this shell is aimed at about 2,600 meters. Ugh. I think it went just long, because it landed the same time he was there, but I think it hit the building on the other side of him. I think I would have been a god if that had hit. Like, semi-god status. But, it's whatever. Trying to line up another shot here. There it goes. Oh, a little I think that was a little short, maybe a little long. And I'm adjusting my sight to give me a better range on him. But I can't see him anymore. Just a little unfortunate. But you'll notice that in the city, oop, someone just got exploded by an M103. So that tells me the M103 is over here, and he has line of sight. Now this is all looking back, so I know where he is now, because obviously I played this game and then I'm watching the replay. But looking at the information I had available to me, I should have been able to know. And bam. You can actually see the muzzle cloud right at the end of the tree line to maybe 15 degrees off my gun. You can kind of see a little muzzle cloud there. Just at the end of the tree line on the when the slope starts to go down at a range of about 1,000 meters or so. Now, I took a hit. I'm scared. So I'm blitzing down here into this low ground because I want to try and get out. Bam! I saw the shot come in there. So I know exactly where he is. Don't immediately repair because I want to get this tank turned around. And I know pretty much exactly where the shell came from now. And I actually, it's funny, I mean, I thought I did. But I actually can't see him because I can't see him with my gun sight because he's on the other side of that hill, basically directly in front of me. And he's actually going to, there it was. That was the shot that completely gave him away. He basically hit the hill in front of me. This tank is so low profile that he actually can't hit me. So I'm trying to loop shots over the top, and I actually can hit him. Now, the issue is I'm using binoculars, and I'm trying to gauge range, and the game just ended, so I don't get a chance to take him out. But I actually had the advantage there, even though he hit me first, because I was able to get down into lower ground and make it so that he couldn't hit me, but my lower velocity shells were going to be able to hit him. So, you know, a fun little game in the SU-122-54. Unfortunately, I got bombed. I could have probably had an even better game. But that's kind of just how life goes sometimes, you know. It's whatever. But there's two distinct playstyles with this tank. And I generally feel that this tank is going to be the one that does kind of the least out of all the 8.0 Soviet tanks. It's just not as flexible as the T-54 is, and to some degree the IS-4 and IS-3 are. So you're generally going to, I feel, have lower scores. But, this is a fun game. Let's move on to the next replay, shall we? So here we are in a realistic battle on the Eastern Europe map. Now, this game doesn't have very many players in it, which is unfortunate. But I'm kind of taking the same strategy I took in the last game. I'm flanking. My goal is to basically be a anti-flank unit. I don't want the enemy to be able to get into this ground over here, because a lot of times it seems that the game's decided by basically whoever gets to this low ground over here first and then kills the opposition in the town. I want to try and prevent that, but it's difficult when I'm the only one over here. So we're going to have a go. But we are going to have to worry about fast little annoying tanks coming over here. But pushing out over here, this is always a dangerous spot because the houses on the road near the other spawn are where people like to hang out, and they can always see you right here. I, however, am going to spot a king tiger, who I don't think spotted me, or maybe he did, but it doesn't matter now. You can see kind of what the heat shell can do at range. I don't really need to aim, kind of. I just need to hit his upper glacis somewhere, and usually that's enough to set him on fire or cause some serious problems for him. And I'm already reloaded, so I get over here, and I'm going to notice that there's an M47 who's kind of skulking around there, and I actually spot him through the trees right there. And he fired, which helps. He backs up, goes forward. I land a shell right through the side of his turret. Kind of the disadvantage of a heat shell here. This would have been better for AP, because an AP shell probably would have knocked his tank out. It would have just exploded inside the tank and caused some serious problems. But heat is what I had loaded, so heat is what I fired. And I wasn't sure if it was worth reloading AP because this is too early in the game, and what if I run into an M103 frontally? I kind of need the heat at that point. So that M47, though, is going to kind of ignore that I exist, which is unfortunate because I clearly do exist, and I clearly have 122 millimeters of Soviet heat shell ready for the side of his tank. So in this situation, it probably would have been better for him to divert his attention from the flanks of my teammates, and come after me, which is what I was expecting to happen here. I was expecting him to repair and then come flanking around and basically draw me out into this field over here where he could get the first shot But instead, he's decided to continue firing at Allied tanks, which I think is a little awkward because, like I said, I have a large shell waiting for him, and I knock him out. Now, based on how many players there are in the game, it's kind of safe to assume that he was the only guy over here. So I decided to take a more aggressive, advanced position, I guess you could call it. It's honestly a little aggressive, but the problem we had is that a lot of our guys in the town were pinned down, and I need to get up here to start flanking their guys and try and kind of push them out so that our guys can push forward. Now I come up over here, and my goal is to kind of get on the edge and then turn inwards and have lines of fire onto them as they hopefully advance towards their cap, trying to push us out of it. Gonna use some concealment here. I should be using my binoculars to help me spy around. But I need to be getting up onto this little ridge here. I have good concealment to the side. Not the best, but I have decent concealment. And we have someone in the cap circle, so they really need my support. But I'm trying to figure out the best way to approach this. I mean, in theory, I can shoot over that little ridge. It's just it's going to be difficult because I'm going to have to use my binoculars to line up the shot and then basically guesstimate range without being able to see the target, which is pretty difficult. I spot that bomber coming in, so I try and warn my guy in the cap circle because obviously I don't want him to get bombed. He's almost bait right now. But I need to get in a better position to overwatch his position. So I'm going to move up over here, still behind a decent amount of concealment. Not the best. If I fire, I will be absolutely spotted. But I'm looking for any muzzle flash, anything that would indicate an enemy tank. And I actually am going to spot one right there. First shell goes in, causes some damage. An AP shell would have been better in that situation, but he just what I had loaded again. And I got his horizontal drive, which makes me feel good. Now, unfortunate shot there. I do get his, I believe his gunner, which is good. It means less crew. But I know his horizontal drive is out, and I know he hasn't repaired. So I don't feel bad pushing forward, getting onto this road, and getting basically a strong position to fire my next shell. Oh, gonna have to move the tank a bit. He's making it difficult for me, but my next shot goes in, and I nail the other two crew members. So now it's time to reposition. I don't want him to... I'm going this way, but my intent is to go back to the previous position I was in. So I'm kind of letting him respawn, and then I'm moving away. So it looks like I went back down into the town, but I don't know if that is going to be that effective. I'm going to come up over here. I'm looking behind me because that's where they're going to spawn. We are knocking out some tanks. We're bringing it back, but we are at a kind of a disadvantage. They have more players than us, which is unfortunate. And our guys are very spread out. Whereas we're really close to their spawn, at least myself and my teammate. So that's usually an issue because they can spawn and then immediately start shooting at us. So I'm waiting again right here. Kind of looking around, trying to spot them obviously before they spot me, but making sure my flank is secure, something you always need to be doing in War Thunder regardless of what tank you're driving. And honestly, regardless of your position, you should always make sure your flanks are secure. I spotted an enemy tank, but all of a sudden I started taking AAA fire, which I was more worried was going to give away my position to the enemy tank that I was about to shoot. I'm not really that concerned about the AAA. He probably can't kill me, especially not from the front. But it is something to be concerned about. My ally is actually engaging the tank I wanted to shoot, but I kind of can't show my side to the AAA. And also, the enemy tank has actually moved into a position I can't see him. So the best move, I guess, is to deal with this AAA. You might as well be shooting something. Spot the AAA. He starts moving forward, but I kind of pre-aim the corner and get a really good hit on the front of his tank. start spraying him down with machine gun, but it's not tremendously useful. He's going to escape and start repairing. But I can't chase after him. Chasing after him is the wrong move, because if I chase after him, I basically leave my guy out to dry, and I think the M103 actually just scored a double kill, which is actually going to be a serious problem for this game. M103 getting a double kill, it's not good. We don't have many tanks left, and that's part of the issue I've found, is that if the Russian team gets bombed, it can be difficult to come back, primarily because it forces you to attack defensive positions held by M103s, which have the hand of God attached to the front of their tank. It is a very potent gun, and I'm glad it has that gun. You know, it's kind of what the American tanks needed, is a really powerful gun. I spot that guy moving in, but I just took a hit from a T-95. I didn't know it was a T-95 initially, but I turn, I see something moving, so I fire the shell, realize it's a T-95, and I actually am not in a bad position to engage this guy. It's not clear where I should shoot him, because I have 400mm penetration, but the T-95's front is kind of weird, and I actually get bombed. A little unfortunate. That's going to be the end of, basically the end of my involvement in this game. We would go on to lose. I decided to spawn in a T-54, I believe, and got handled pretty well by an M103. So, anyway, let's move on to the final opinion, shall we? Alright, so opinion time. What do I think of the SU-122-54? I think it's a pretty solid, it's a tank destroyer, and it's unturreted, so it has those limitations. That's why early in the beginning of the video I said I think this thing will be dropped in battle rating. And I think it'll go to about 7.7. It won't go much lower than that, mainly due to the gun. But the reason I think that is part of what makes this tank great is good, not great, good, is stealth. Being able to stay in cover, being able to ambush and attack and use that rate of fire and things like that. My issue is that as the game currently stands, stealth is not something you can rely on. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there have been times where I've been hit by an M103 through 3 or 4 layers of concealment at 1,000 meters. There have been very suspicious circumstances where I'll get hit and have no pretense as to how I was spotted, you know. And I'm not going to go into specifics, but there's been situations where they were very suspicious. And it comes back to probably one of my biggest gripes is that I'm going to say it the way Jingle said it, because I think he says it the best. When the player can decide the difficulty. And the issue is that tanks that require stealth generally are going to suffer more so than tanks that don't necessarily need to be stealthy. Because the tanks that don't need to be stealthy are going to be in your face. They're going to be spotted all the time. It's kind of like the World of Tanks logic, that heavy tanks are always going to be spotted, basically. So you put all your crew skills into damage control, basically, like repairs and things like that. You don't put anything into camo because you're going to get spotted. This tank relies on its ability to stay hidden and attack at opportune moments and ambush and engage in longer range engagements, that when someone is playing with, you know, vegetation off or even on extremely low, it can take away that advantage, right? And I do believe that there are people who do it for a competitive advantage, not because they have to. So that being said, this tank is going to be hampered, and I think people are generally not going to do as well in it as they could, because this tank really requires a more passive playstyle. It's something that I really struggled to do when I first started playing it. I was way too aggressive, and that led to me having not very good games for, you know, days. And it's something that's part of the reason why I think the battle rating be dropped, because you have to consider how War Thunder does its battle rating system, which is a subject for a different video, but it's based on statistics. So if people do bad in a tank, its battle rating gets dropped over the course of however many games it takes. So this tank is, I think, going to be one of the lower performers among the current 8.0 battle rating tanks. So I think it's conceivable that it could be dropped in battle rating. Not that it deserves it. I think this tank is fine at 8.0. I think it's respectable at 8.0. The gun is the main reason. The gun is powerful. Thinking about it more, I would almost backtrack and say I think this is the most powerful gun equipped to an 8.0 battle rating tank. Now, if it would be a very easy thing to say if it had the same muzzle velocity as an M103. If it had the M103's muzzle velocity, this would be hands down the best gun in the game. You know, because it has a better rate of fire and it can hit targets. It's just a good gun as it is, but if you made it that one bit better, it would be just brokenly overpowered. So I guess I'm glad it's not like that. But it can penetrate everything it sees, which to me means it should stay where it is. But I would not be surprised if it is dropped. And I guess just to reiterate, I'm not saying that I think it should be dropped, because I don't. I'm saying that I think it will be. And that's kind of regardless of my thoughts on whether it should be dropped or not. So I hope that made sense. I hope you don't take it as me saying this tank needs to be dropped in battle rating, because it doesn't. It's fine where it is, but it's entirely possible that it will be. Especially when tanks that feed on unturreted things like Leopard 1s and M60s, you know, those type of tanks come into the fold, we're going to see some issues for unturreted tanks. They're going to be generally feasted on by quick, agile tanks with good guns, with high penetration good guns. So, but back to the tank at large, I think it's a very good machine. It's not the first 8.0 battle rating tank I would research. I still think the T-54-19, well, I mean, it's not an 8.0 anymore, but the T-54s are probably still my recommendation. Get at least one of them. Get your IS-3, maybe grind another T-54, then get your IS-4, or maybe get your IS-4, then grind another It really doesn't matter. All 5 of these tanks are good. This is probably your next move, because the ZSU is kind of, to me, I don't know. I don't like it as much, because heat shells are so prevalent now, and they generally just do their damage, and this thing can suffer from that. But I would go for this guy next, after you get maybe you get a heavy tank, maybe get a medium tank, then come over here and get this guy. Especially with the tank destroyer line being reshuffled, it actually makes more sense now. So this is a pretty solid, like maybe 3rd, 4th tank to get on your Russian grind. But I think it's worth the wait. I think it's worth the grind. You have to give it a chance, and you really have to play it passively. You have to find a good position with good concealment and hope that no one is playing in easy mode, and then you just let the gun go to work. You got to practice with the gun so you can land your first shot, and then you just work people over like that. So that's my thoughts on the SU-122-54. I hope this review was helpful. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments section. I'd be more than happy to address them. And like always, I've been Corny Swiss, and I'll see you next time.